Welcome to the CEC Report. It's April 13. I'm Robert Barwick and I'm joined again by CEC leader Craig Isherwood. Welcome, Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie.
In this week's CEC Report, Australia pushing war with China. Are we nuts? Why the opinions of 60 scientists on the Murray-Darling Basin Plan are worthless. And finally, NAWAPA XXI, the only future for the world. So first, Australia pushing war with China. Are we nuts? This week, a retired Chief of the Australian Army, General Peter Leahy, who was the Chief of the Army from 2003 to 2008, wrote an opinion column in The Australian on the 12th of April, warning that, echoing effectively what we've been saying for a long time now, that Australia's present policy was pushing us to war with China. And specifically what Leahy was talking about was the closer cooperation we've had with the United States since the decision to allow America to set up a marine base in Darwin. And of course, since then you've had upgrading of Perth and Brisbane ports and this discussion about using the Cocos Islands as a US surveillance base.
And that's actually happening now with the 120 odd troops come in just recently, the last week or so.
Yeah, the Marines have arrived now. And Stephen Smith greeted them personally. Now, Leahy warned that decision to allow a US marine base in Darwin will lead to US pressure for even closer military cooperation on Obama's Asia-Pacific pivot, which is what Obama's causing it. Leahy wrote, quote, "These are momentous decisions with far-reaching consequences. They potentially implicate Australia in a series of actions that could lead to increased tension and even conflict with China. War is improbable, but not impossible. Australia needs to be careful that it does not make inevitable the future that it should fear the most." End quote. Now, as an example, another example of our shenanigans in this regard, take the case of the North Korean supposed missile threat. It has proven to be the lie that we said it was. It was never a threat. Now, there's a few proofs for that. One is North Korea is notoriously secretive and closed. They've never been more open than on this launch, and they allowed journalists and scientists in and NASA astronauts, etc., who had total access to look at this, and they all could see that it was an actual attempt for a satellite. We've just had breaking news, Craig, and you've looked at it a bit more than me, so you can comment on it, but it's regarded as having failed.
Well, yeah, if you have a look at the news, Robbie, what strikes you is that the hegemony across all Western media outlets, Sydney Morning Herald, New York Times, the Asia Times, all these sorts of things, it's the same headline.
They're all spinning the same line.
The missile failed after a minute or two. Now, the problem you've got is that we actually don't know what's going on. We're only listening to a media with vested interests in whatever happens in North Korea.
It's a good example for the audience because they would generally believe the media. But if they think about it, how do we know that's true?
Well, North Korea has launched satellites in the past. It launched one in 1998, it launched another one in 2009, and the North Koreans are saying those satellites are up there already playing music and everything. Yet the West said that they failed. So here we are in the same scenario again. But the problem I've got with this, Robbie, is that it's got nothing to do with the missile launch. This has got everything to do with the encirclement of Russia and China as part of this bigger game plan of what we've been talking about on this program of the development of World War III.
Well, and just to be specific for the audience, North Korea's only sponsor in the world economy is China.
That's right.
So all this chest beating we've been doing against North Korea, the Chinese themselves say, that's aimed at us.
Yeah, and see, I think one of my colleagues said this week, he says, we're really in World War III now, and it sort of took me back a bit, and I thought about it, and I said, well, that's actually right. If you go back and have a look at World War I, it didn't start immediately with the declaration of war. It started with the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, I believe, in Serbia. But there was already a lot of geopolitical moves done specifically by King Edward VII of the British Empire at that point to stop the massive economic development potential of Russia.
And Germany.
And Germany at the same time, because in Russia you had Count Sergei Witte in particular trying to develop the Trans-Siberian Railroad system, And in Germany, you had the work of Friedrich List and the development under Bismarck of the German economy. So you had these two nation states developing their sovereignty, but also what this meant was that you were seeing a shift, Robbie, from a maritime-based culture, which was dominated by the British Empire, to a land corridor, railway corridor based economy.
Because Britain's power, imperial power, or its might, was based on its navy. It ruled the seas.
Yeah.
So if you got transcontinental railway lines, you don't need to use the seas.
Well, that's right. And so consequently, Britain saw this, or the British Empire, I should say, saw this as a specific threat. So therefore, they started to mobilise their assets in both Germany and Russia to try and stop stop this development. And consequently, the development of World War I happened many years before.
Well, Edward VIII spent over a decade carefully putting together alliances that if the standard histories talk about World War I starting with the assassination of the Archduke, when you see the series of domino events that happened, where the alliances triggered reactions, that's what it was. The groundwork for that was laid by Edward VII.
And that's what we're seeing today with Obama's move for Darwin, the Gillard government. You're seeing, in effect, the Cocos Islands being brought in as a means of spying on not just Asian nations, but specifically China.
And also, Craig, it gives, if people look at the Cocos on a map, it gives the Americans very close control over the two main sea routes between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah, well, look, Obama is a puppet of the British monetary financial system, which is in the process of disintegration. It's not just our neck of the woods, it's being exposed to the potential of nuclear weapons from China. I mean, the problem is that China has had in a sense, a no first strike policy of nuclear weapons. It hasn't been concerned about going to developing its nuclear arsenal. But these sorts of threats that it sees as a threat are saying, well, you want us to overturn this first use policy, this policy we have towards thermonuclear war? Well, you're forcing us into this position. We're not necessarily wanting to go in that direction, but you're forcing us in this direction. Then we're just one part of the globe, Robbie, because there's an entire circlement taking place with Russia as well. You have a look at what's being done with Iran. Recently, it was demands for Iran to disassemble one of its underground nuclear facilities before certain strategic talks were taken on. This was just complete thuggery. But it's continuing the drumbeat against Iran's development of peaceful nuclear weapons.
And Australians, Craig, need to realise...
Not nuclear weapons, nuclear energy.
But Australians need to realise that if we tolerate these demands, if we think we have the right to make these demands, we're actually tolerating imperialism. Any dictation to a sovereign nation state is not respecting its sovereignty.
Yeah. And look, take for example the Assad government now in Syria, right? It agreed to the ceasefire. It's trying to abide by it, but the government says, well, if we're going to remove our troops from these areas, we want a written guarantee from the opposition that they're going to do the same thing. No written opposition, they wouldn't agree to it. The opposition would not agree in writing to these terms of the ceasefire. So what is a sovereign government supposed to do? I mean, this is the sort of blackmail that the international community is holding because the issue is regime change. Destroy sovereign governments. And unfortunately, our government is very compliant with the British mode of thinking in terms of us being a colonial mentality, which is why we go along with these sorts of imperial desires of the likes of Obama, the British puppet.
So just on that, in a little bit of time we've got left, it's very significant then that General Lay, or this retired general, has come out and, in his own words, from his own standpoint, pretty much echo what we've been saying.
Well, I think when you're in the front line, Robbie, if you're the troops going off to war, you're the ones that are facing the live ammunition, or you're responsible for troops facing live ammunition. I think you have to really understand what...
You take it seriously.
You take it seriously and understand what the reality is. So consequently, I suspect there's a lot of high-ranking generals and military people that know exactly what the truth is, and they don't believe the political propaganda.
We know that's true in America, and this indicates there's plenty of it here as well.
Yeah.
All right, well, we've gone a little bit over time there, but we'll leave it there. When we return, we're going to talk about why the opinions of 60 scientists are worthless. Welcome back to the CEC Report. Why the opinions of 60 scientists on the Murray-Darling Basin Plan are worthless. 60 scientists this week have come out attacking the proposed Murray-Darling Basin Plan in its current form, saying that it falls short of meeting the environmental targets set down in the Water Act, and therefore
the political environmental targets.
Very good, Craig. The political environmental targets, and they're saying the whole thing should not be rushed ahead and implemented. We should make it worse. Now, of course, we take entirely the opposite view. We think it's rubbish as well, but because it's taking away water from precious food production, right? But the scientists are saying, no, it doesn't take away enough water. And what they're doing, they are demanding, like the Greens Party, the Greens in Parliament, and Prince Philip's Australian Conservation Foundation are the most prominent on this. They're demanding much greater water be stripped away from the irrigators, and they're talking about a minimum of 4,000 gigalitres and preferably 7,000 gigalitres, which is more than half of what's taken out for irrigation. Now, Craig, the word scientist is supposed to make people go weak at the knees and accept without question. And I wanted to contrast for the reader, for the viewers, another scientist. This man is Professor John Briscoe. He's the Gordon Mackay Professor of the Practice of Environmental Engineering at Harvard University. For many years, he was the World Bank's #1 water expert in doing water practice around the world. And he headed the peer review committee for the first draft of the Murray-Darling Basin Authority Guide to the Basin Plan, which came out in 2010, when we first started talking about this. As the head of the peer review committee, his job was to make sure the mathematics added up, etc. When he got a chance, he put in a private submission to the federal parliament, and I got a copy of it here, and we've talked about this before, but I want to give some quotes here. And in that submission, he made clear that as a scientist, he took a completely different view than we are told the scientists are taking today. Let me just give you the quotes. Over the last 10 years, Australia did something which no other country could conceivably have managed. In a large irrigated agricultural economy, the Murray-Darling Basin, a 70% reduction in water availability, namely because of the drought, had very little aggregate economic impact. Before the buts and the buts and the buts, this extraordinary achievement is, in my view, the single most important water fact of the 21st century, because it shows that it is possible, with ingenuity and investment, to adapt to rapid climate change and associated water scarcity. Now, we're not going to debate Briscoe on climate change, but he's just talking about that the Murray-Darling has already shown something. What has been very striking to me on my visits to Australia is how dramatically this perspective is different from the political and public perception, which is largely that, quote, we have done a terrible job. The Honourable Malcolm Turnbull, author of the Water Act 2007, claims that, quote, our water management has been extremely ill-informed in years past. And the Murray-Darling Basin Authority's ill-fated Guide to the Basin Plan asserts that, quote, over the past few decades, the focus has swung to look at economics and the role of the environment has been overlooked, end quote. I found, this is Briscoe again, I found and find this diagnosis A, extraordinarily widespread, and B, extraordinarily erroneous. What is obvious to me is that the overwhelming factor behind the dismal situation in the Murray-Darling Basin was the dramatic reduction in rainfall and even larger reduction in river flows. It is equally clear to me that the institutional response of the Murray-Darling Basin Commission, the basin states and farmers was extraordinarily innovative and, within the bounds set by nature, effective. Not only for the economy, but, as shown by the National Water Commission, for ameliorating the environmental damage of the terrible drought. So this is a man who knows water worldwide, and he said Australia's farmers and the people whose job is to manage this have already done a brilliant job. And he's obviously an environmental leading scientist himself. And he went on in there to talk about how this was the most political and secretive process he'd ever witnessed, more than anywhere else in the world that he'd been. So I was thinking, what explains the difference between Briscoe and these 60 Australian scientists from this week? We've covered this in our publications. We're going to do more on it. But the bottom line is this. Australian science is governed by a green political regime. And that governance shapes the outcome of its research. The same green fascists who started the Australian Conservation Foundation in the 1960s ran the CSIRO and the Australian Academy of Sciences. And those two organisations have spearheaded the frauds, scientific frauds, of overpopulation and climate change. Right? It's all vested in those two interests, in those two organisations, and it's all with their green tinge. And Craig, isn't the issue here that it is a fallacy to think that science is objective?
In this particular case, Robbie, look, there's a German term that I like to use called Brockgelehrten, which means bread-fed scholars, right? So what you have here is objective science. The money buys the science. It's as simple as that.
It's objectively commercial.
It's objectively, the money buys the science, because real science doesn't involve objectivity. Real science involves looking for the paradoxes in the world today, in the universe, and then finding out how those paradoxes impact on human civilization, human life, on the economy, and then actually make the discoveries of the principles behind those to employ in the economy. Real science is about finding that which is not objective, but then proving it in the sense of the objective realm. But unfortunately, today, the political agenda comes first, through Prince Philip and the Green Movement, as we've indicated in our publications. Then the objective proof is selected facts that back up the political objective.
Now, we did a DVD that we've promoted here a lot on the fraud of ecosystems, which show the origin of that back to Bertrand Russell's buddy Sir Arthur Tansley, and how they had this view that human beings were overpopulating the earth, etc., and they come up with a scientific view of a balance of nature that conveniently classified humans as the source of the imbalance of nature, which fit in with their already existing worldview. And isn't that the pattern we see repeating all the time?
All the time, because the intention is population reduction. You have an elite group of oligarchs, we refer to them, which are basically inside the British monetarist empire. They intend to reduce the world's population by destroying nation states and destroying the capacity of nation states to feed and to develop their populations. And that's what you're seeing in terms of the global strategic policies within every single country under globalisation. Globalisation is simply the flip side of the green fascist movements that we see that are shutting down the economies as well. If you don't get destroyed by globalising, that is opening up your economies to cheap imports and to the manipulations of speculative monetary systems, as we see with the stock market and for derivatives and speculation, then you get wiped out with these green policies that are shutting down productive land and so forth. It's the same beast from the same bestial British Empire.
Yep, that's its intention. Well, Craig, I thought we should highlight this today just because we've been leading the fight against the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. The consultation period is now over for the benefit of the readers, the viewers. Within a couple of months, Tony Burke has to announce what the nature of the plan is actually going to be. And so you're seeing a massive whip up of propaganda now to put maximum pressure on. And what is very important for Australian citizens to realise is just because someone has the title scientist doesn't mean you accept what they say by faith. And that's what we're dealing with lately in recent times with this scientific, well, it's what H.G. Wells called the brotherhood of science, that scientists should be the board of directors for the world and everyone should just listen to their dictates. Don't do that. Anyway, so we're running short of time. When we come back, we're going to talk about NAWAPA 21, the only future for the world. Welcome back to the CEC Report. Finally, we want to talk about an exciting new report that's been produced by the LaRouche Political Action Committee in the United States, NAWAPA 21, and how this report shows that the NAWAPA project is the only future for the world. The NAWAPA idea as a concept stands as the alternative to the dangers facing the world at the moment, which is economic collapse and thermonuclear world war. Because as a project, it will transform the world and it will engender a spirit of cooperation among nations. And I wanted Craig to do most of the talking on this. So I've got a couple of things I want to ask you to comment on, Craig. First, for the parochial Australian, how will this project, this NAWAPA project, impact Australia?
The same way that the Snowy Mountain Scheme, Robbie, transformed Australia back in the 40s, 50s, 60s. The Snowy Mountain Scheme had a number of engineers that were trained in the Tennessee Valley Authority, right? Like, for example, our very great friend, Professor Lance Endersby, who died a couple of years ago. He was trained on these great projects and brought that engineering techniques back to Australia, but also the idea that of great optimism, that we can transform the environment for the increase of the productive potential of all human beings, like for agriculture through hydroelectricity. So what the NAWAPA represents is a rebirth of optimism. America has a lot of water problems right now, the North American continent, particularly, and also the Southern American continent in Mexico. And the idea is to harvest, in a sense, the huge volumes of water up in the Alaskan region and channel those down through the Rocky Mountain Trench, through canals, through the use of nuclear energy pumping, through hydroelectric schemes and so on and so forth, in order to provide water, to scarce water resources to the vast areas of the United States that could be developed for agriculture and industry. So this is a huge project.
And isn't it true? Isn't it true? It's so big. It's going to so massively boost America's productivity that it has to boost the productivity of the whole world.
Well, it does, because you're talking 100,000 engineers just in the US alone. This project then allows the connection via the Bering Strait to Russia. That means it involves the development of the far eastern regions of Siberia. It involves China, because China wants to develop the northern regions, bordering onto Russia. You could have integrated rail systems, Robbie, right throughout the whole NAWAPA project, right the way through from Europe all the way through Russia, down through the Bering Strait, Alaska, down through Canada, North America into Mexico, and right down to the tip of South America, in fact.
All right, I'm going to have to cut you off, sorry, because I wanted to talk about...
All right.
One of the stunning things about this report is the author, the people who put it together, have put a lot of effort into explaining national banking and a credit system. The number one concept people have to understand, which is the solution to the still deepening global economic collapse. So what can you say about that?
Well, we have a history in Australia of the Commonwealth Bank, and I think it's the best illustration that people have some memory of, that King O'Malley, when he set that bank up, he was able to provide a bank that could fund the First World War. It bought the Adelaide Steamship Company. It created the manufacturers necessary for uniforms for our soldiers. Now, this was done as, in a sense, a credit facility, not a debt facility. Today, our government goes cap in hand to the private bankers, please, sir, give me some money, and pay exorbitant interest rates for that privilege. But you're also indebted, literally, to the whims of the private banking system. What we're talking about, a credit system, is a sovereign government saying we are taking control of the monetary supply and the credit supply of our nation. This is not like a household budget where we can't create money. We can't say we're going to print some money in the back shed tomorrow to supplement our weekly budget or our weekly income. A government can do that because sovereign governments have control over their monetary supply.
And at the moment we let private banks do it.
Well, that's exactly right. So in terms of a credit system, there's a political decision to say we need to increase the capability for infrastructure to develop this. We're going to create the credit, and we're going to issue that in a responsible way in order to increase the physical productive output of our country. It's a political decision first.
Yep. All right. Thanks, Craig. As I said, it's explained in detail. Just hold that up for the viewers. It's explained in detail on that, so definitely get a copy of this report from us and read it. We'll have to leave it there for this week's CEC Report. Thanks for tuning in, and tune in next week for more.